All right, I think we're going to get started. Thank you all so very much for joining this webinar today. We are going to be giving a presentation today on the Stevens Initiative's 2022 Virtual Exchange Grant Competition. And we are also going to be saving time at the end of our presentation for your questions, which we will be answering live. So if you have any questions during this presentation, please submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll be addressing those during the second half of the presentation. We also may be responding to you in writing. Just before we get started, I want to remind you all that we have shared publicly and in your confirmation of registering for this webinar, a list of frequently asked questions to our virtual exchange competition. That can be really helpful to consult if you have questions, because it's, I'm sure as you have seen, pretty robust. And we also have a common feedback page on the Stevens Initiative's website, which includes feedback on previous virtual exchange competitions. That can also be really helpful. And then lastly, I just wanted to let you all know that this webinar is being recorded. So if you are so inclined, you can watch it again and again on the Stevens Initiative's YouTube page, or you can share it with any colleagues who are not able to join us today. So I'm going to kick us off. You cannot see me at the moment, but you will see me later. My name is Andy Schaefer with the Stevens Initiative. I oversee the initiative's grant portfolio. I am going to be joined today in presentation by my colleague Mariam Lally, who works with me. And during the Q&A session, I'm also going to be joined by my colleagues Henry Shepard, Kyle Kassler, and Omar Al-Sawalha, who all will be helping to field your questions. So I look forward to having them join us on camera a little bit later. So really pleased that you all could join us today. I'm just going to give you a very brief introduction to the Stevens Initiative to start us off with. If you are not familiar with the Stevens Initiative already, we're then going to get into the details of the competition itself. We'll talk a little bit about the application process as well as our review and selection process. We'll speak very briefly about budgeting and compliance, although we are going to be hosting a separate webinar just on budgeting and compliance and federal awards on July 12th. So we'll share more information about that at the end of our presentation. We'll also share a little bit about some of the support we have for applicants, because there's a lot that we're able to offer. And then we will spend the latter half of our time together answering your questions. So with that, I'll just talk very briefly about the Stevens Initiative itself for those of you who are new here. The Stevens Initiative is a lasting tribute to the late Ambassador J. Christopher Stevens, who dedicated his career to building bridges between people in the United States and in the Middle East and North Africa, or sometimes we say the MENA region. The ambassador studied in Europe during high school and college, and he served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Morocco. And these experiences while he was young shaped his view of the world and fueled his curiosity and prepared him to be a diplomat. And he earned the esteem of people wherever he served. And so the Stevens Initiative, created in his honor, aims to make these kinds of international learning experiences available and accessible to a wide number, an unprecedented number of young people through virtual exchanges. And currently, those virtual exchanges that we are looking to fund are connecting youth in the United States with youth in the Middle East and North Africa. The 2022 virtual exchange competition is sponsored by the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, with additional funding provided by the Bezos Family Foundation. The Stevens Initiative was conceived and developed in close partnership with the family of Ambassador Stevens, and it was launched in 2015. And the Stevens Initiative is housed at the Aspen Institute. So just very briefly to level set, what we mean when we are talking about virtual exchange and the types of virtual exchange programs that we are looking to fund, we're essentially talking about programs that involve sustained, technology-enabled communication and collaboration, both synchronously or in real time, or asynchronously over a period of time between young people in different places. Many practitioners believe that facilitation by prepared and responsible adults who often, but are not always, educators is an important component of successful virtual exchange. Really importantly, we think that virtual exchange can be integrated into many different subjects, just about any subject from science, STEM, business, the arts, you name it. And so just to speak very briefly about the Stevens Initiative's work, we are seeking to build the field of virtual exchange by working in three main areas. One is grant making, which is what we are here to talk about today. We run competitions to fund virtual exchange programs connecting young people in the US with young people in the Middle East and North Africa. Through these programs, we're able to collect data, share best practices, develop resource, and serve as a knowledge hub to help grow the field. Having these resources also helps us to raise the profile of virtual exchange globally. So I'm going to turn it over to Mariam now to get into the specifics of the competition. So over to you, Mariam.
Thank you, Andy. In the next few slides, we will cover more information about the open competition and the rules to apply. Again, all of these rules, regulations, and details around the competition are listed in the competition call for proposals on SurveyMonkey Apply. One thing that we want to reiterate right at the beginning, and I know Andy mentioned this as well, is that our competition is currently only funding virtual exchanges between the United States and the Middle East and North Africa. With that, I will talk a little bit more about the different types of grants that are available for this competition. Similar to past competitions, the initiative is offering two types of grants through this competition: scaling and seeding. Scaling grants are larger grants for organizations that have experience conducting high-quality virtual exchange and are seeking to further expand their program. On the other hand, seeding grants are smaller grants for organizations that are seeking to grow and improve an early stage program. In this competition, both scaling and seeding grants are 27 months long, with a period of performance starting on April 1st, 2023 to June 30th, 2025. The grant size ranges are different for scaling and seeding grants. As you can see on this slide, those who are applying for scaling grants can request between $350,000 up to $900,000, or $100,000 up to $300,000 for seeding grants. And all application materials are due September 29th, 2022 at 5 p.m. US Eastern Time. Now, who can apply for these grants? Organizations that are both based in the US and in the Middle East and North Africa are qualified to apply. U.S. organizations must be tax-exempt nonprofit organizations, and MENA-based organizations must be nonprofit organizations that are registered in country. And in both regions, of course, this includes educational institutions as well. Organizations that are not eligible to directly apply may be listed as a partner on a Stevens Initiative award. And staff should be proficient in English, and any past and current recipients of the Stevens Initiative grants or U.S. Department of State funds are eligible to submit applications if the proposed work does not involve any overlap in staff, curriculum, participants, etc., with currently funded work. Now, the initiative adheres to the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs to define the places in the MENA region eligible for programming. The Bureau defines the MENA region as the countries that you see listed on the slide, and I will pause here for a second so you can read through those. Okay. The initiative has two funding priorities based on the topic of the virtual exchange and the demographics of the intended participants. The priority topics are listed on this slide, and they are technology and computing, engaging with local and global challenges, business and entrepreneurship, and language learning and practice. The second funding priority refers to the intended participants in the virtual exchange program. In addition to having participants in the eligible geographic locations and age ranges that are indicated in the call for proposal, the initiative prioritizes reaching participants in historically underserved or marginalized communities in both the US and the MENA region. Proposals should indicate a participant plan that reaches diverse participants, and proposals can receive additional points for addressing the following priorities in their proposal. The US-based participant priorities include students from minority-serving institutions at the higher educational level, students from higher education institutions with a high percentage of Pell Grant recipient students, students from Title I school-wide program schools, and other marginalized youth as specified by the applicant. The MENA-based participant priorities include students from educational institutions where English is not the main language of instruction, young people from Iraq, Libya, Syria, Yemen, and the Palestinian territories, and other marginalized youth as specified by the applicant. We will prioritize applications that meet these funding priorities, but applicants are not required to put forward proposals for these priority topics or demographic priorities. We will consider all eligible applications. And you can read more about these priorities and how applications will be scored for this criterion in the call for proposal. Now, participants can be elementary up to graduate level students and young professionals under the age of 35. We have already covered the participant priorities, so please make sure you refer to the call for proposal for specific details. One thing that we would like to mention is that how participants get involved in the program is up to you. Applicants will decide, for example, if there are going to be application requirements to join the program, if that makes sense for your program design. Applicants are required to report on the proposed cost per participant of their program. For this competition, we define cost per participant as being the total amount being requested by the applicant divided by the total number of US and MENA region young people who would meaningfully participate in the program. We typically expect a participant to complete 75% of the activities or assignments to qualify as having meaningfully participated. If you elect to put costs on cost share in your proposal, that cost share does not contribute to the cost per participant. And as you can see on this slide, the cost per participant ranges are different for scaling grants and seeding grants. We expect grantees to carry out work in several areas related to the virtual exchange program. These include telling participants that they are part of the Stevens Initiative and where the initiative receives its funding, and sharing participants' information with the initiative so that they can be invited to join the Department of State's International Exchange Alumni Network. It also includes supporting some form of alumni engagement, conducting some public communications, and participating in the initiative's monitoring and evaluation processes. Grantees are also expected to submit program and financial reports, and this is done typically on a quarterly basis. And more details about all of these expectations are listed in the call for proposal. In this competition, the initiative has an optional alumni engagement supplement that is only available to scaling applicants. This does not give the applicant any additional points on the scored application. The applicant would submit a normal proposal and would also fill out and upload an additional supplement form and an additional page of the budget template when applying for this supplement. Organizations can apply for funding and request that ranges between $15,000 and up to $50,000. The supplement must show how the applicant would implement alumni action plans and/or other engagement activities to support program alumni in all participating regions after their virtual exchange program has ended. These alumni action plans are the specific intervention or program offered to alumni as opportunities to use or practice the skills or knowledge developed during the program in their lives after their virtual exchange. Examples of action plans include but are not limited to small grants programs, internship opportunities, opportunities to participate in continued learning, program outcome sharing implemented by alumni for a specific audience, or other types of community engagement. And now I'll turn it back to Andy, who will talk about application and selection process.
Thanks, Miriam. I just want to briefly cover a couple of items around application and selection, including a little bit of information about the grant application platform and some of the resources that we have available. So just to talk briefly about selection criteria for scoring grant applications. These are the criteria that are used by our review committee during the selection process. And we have established 9 different criteria for the competition that will be used to evaluate the proposals. Each criterion is listed in the call for proposals with some detailed explanations about what we mean about these different criteria. There are also some questions for consideration. So hopefully this can be helpful to look at as you build out your proposal so that you know what the review committee is looking for. In the call for proposals, we also list out how many points each criterion is worth out of a possible 100 points. I do just want to call your attention to numbers 8 and 9 on your screen here. There is one criterion that is just for scaling proposals, and that is scalability. And there is another criterion that is just for seeding proposals, which is unique contribution to the virtual exchange field. Applications may only be submitted online through, through the initiative's online application system called SurveyMonkey Apply. We cannot consider applications that are received any other way, by email, has to go through SurveyMonkey Apply. For the proposal to be considered and for it to be considered complete, you must complete the application form in its entirety. There are multiple pages and questions. One thing that can be very helpful is looking at, I think we have either a Word or a PDF version of the full narrative proposal listed in the call for proposals on SurveyMonkey Apply. So you can take a look at that in its entirety before you get started and get a sense of what the entire application entails. In order to submit the application form, make sure that the proposal is fully submitted. You should get a note from SurveyMonkey Apply, and you should receive a confirmation email from the platform. So if you do not receive a confirmation email from the platform, check your email, check your spam, go back to your application, make sure that it's been submitted. If all else fails, you can absolutely feel free to send us an email and we'll check on that for you. One other thing I want to mention as it pertains to completing your application, there is also a task to upload required attachments to your proposal. This includes a budget narrative, a timeline, a partnership table, financial statements, the foreign and domestic subrecipient questionnaire, and the alumni supplement if you are applying for one. It's just a bulk upload section, so you are responsible for ensuring that all of the required uploads have been added to that bulk section, and that needs to be completed as well before you submit your proposal. After an application is submitted, after our deadline closes on September 29th, 2022, an independent review committee is going to score the applications to help inform the funding decisions. The call for proposals, as I mentioned before, lists review criteria that is used to inform a scoring rubric for the review committee. Applications are vetted by Stevens Initiative partners, including the U.S. Department of State and U.S. embassies abroad. Regarding a status notification, specific dates have not yet been established for notification. However, we are intending for unsuccessful applicants to be notified by the end of 2022, if possible. And applicants who receive a conditional approval to begin a negotiation and contracting phase, we are also intending to notify by late 2022 or early in the new year in 2023. We are expecting to announce our new cohort of grantees in the spring of 2023 as our new grantees are getting their work started. Okay, I just very briefly want to touch on budgeting. Like I mentioned, we are hosting a separate webinar on budgeting, compliance, federal awards on July 12th at 12 p.m. US Eastern Time. So if you haven't registered for that, but you would like to do so, you can find more information on our website. But very briefly, the Aspen Institute, which is where the Stevens Initiative is housed, is a pass-through entity for federal funds from the U.S. Department of State. What this means is that all federal guidelines that govern the Aspen Institute's agreement with the U.S. Department of State flow down to the Stevens Initiative's grant recipients. As you're thinking about putting together your budget for your proposal, the governing guidelines are in the Office of Management and Budget's Uniform Guidance for Federal Award Management. And there are two sections in this guidance to point your attention toward: 2 CFR 200 and 2 CFR 600. These sections outline budgetary guidance, indirect costs, allowable costs on a federal award, and principles that are associated specifically with receiving Department of State funds. If you are not familiar with these principles, you may want to familiarize yourself with these regulations, particularly if your organization has never received a federal award previously. Generally, in order for costs to align with federal guidelines, all costs and budgets should align with the proposed activities that are in your proposal and should be allowable per the federal guidelines. They should be reasonable and stand up to public scrutiny. They should be allocable, so necessary to conduct the proposed work. And then, of course, they should be necessary costs. Very briefly, a few unallowable costs include alcohol, entertaining costs or entertainment costs, advertising, unless it's specifically for recruitment in your program, or any projects that are designed to advocate for policy views. So more coming up on July 12th. We look forward to seeing you there if you would like to attend. Lastly, before I open things up for questions, I just want to talk about some of the support that is available to applicants. We really excitingly, I think, this year have included a section in our call for proposals called Virtual Exchange Design Considerations. This is by no means a comprehensive list, but we think it's a good kind of checklist or guide to consider when we're thinking about virtual exchange and putting together a proposal that proposes a quality and meaningful virtual exchange program. As I mentioned earlier, we're hosting several additional webinars to support our applicants. On July 12th, we'll be talking about budget and compliance. And then on August 10th, we're hosting another webinar essentially intended to answer any additional questions live before the competition closes on September 29th. Recordings of all of our webinars will be posted to the Stevens Initiative's YouTube channel. We also have resources available both in our call for proposals and on our website. We, as I mentioned, have a frequently asked questions document that we will be updating throughout the summer. So questions that come up, please feel free to keep checking back on that. It's a very robust document, so hopefully a question that you may have has been answered on that document. Our website also has a PDF that includes feedback on past applications during our 2020 competition. This is obviously somewhat broad because the parameters of our competitions change. But it can be very helpful as you're thinking about putting together a proposal this year. And our website also contains a lot of additional resources about virtual exchange and virtual exchange practice. Also on our website, I did just want to say, if you have sat through this entire webinar and you have decided, okay, I don't think this competition is a good fit for me, or I am not eligible to apply for this competition, but I'm really interested in virtual exchange. I want to find ways to engage. Please do visit our website. There are additional ways to engage with the Stevens Initiative and with virtual exchange more broadly, if that is of interest. If all else fails, please feel free to send us an email at stevensinitiative@aspeninstitute.org. That address is listed on the screen here. You can feel free to ask us questions and we will get back to you as soon as we can. And with that, I will invite my colleagues to join me on video, and we will start to answer questions that you may have. Again, please feel free to use that Q&A box that's at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Hello. And we will try to get through as many questions as we can with the time that we have left. So I'll turn it over to you, Henry.
Hi there, can you hear me okay? Great, thanks for the thumbs up. And Miriam and Andy, thank you so much for a great presentation. I'll try to keep things moving pretty briskly, and we'll try to cover as many questions as we can. As my colleagues have said, please type your questions in the Q&A box. If you've raised your hand using the raised hand feature, please type your question in the chat box instead. We're not going to be taking questions out loud, and we will try to get to as many questions in the Q&A box as possible. So I'll leave it open to my colleagues to respond, whoever among you feels comfortable responding. And note that I'm going to try to speak the questions the way they've been posed, but if you think that the question needs an answer that goes somewhat beyond what the person is asked about, don't hesitate to answer what you think they might be getting at as well. The first question I'll pose is this. Do applicants from the MENA region have to have a defined partner in the United States when they apply, or can this be left to after the time they receive funding?
Can I jump in? And Andy, please feel free to respond. I think as much as possible that you can move along with any partnerships that you have is the best strategy. So if you have a partner in mind in the United States that is willing to write a supporting letter with the program that you would like to start, then that is what we recommend. We do understand that some partners are not comfortable signing a MOU or a contract prior to receiving an award, and that is fine as long as there is a solid plan or an action plan of how that partnership is going to go forward. But yes, we highly recommend that you do have partners in line.
The only other thing I would add to that is the review committee will be reviewing the proposed partners and the proposed participants who will be in the program. So allowing the review committee the ability to have a sense of who all is going to be in the proposed program will be really helpful. I would also say we understand that, like Miriam mentioned, it's probably a delicate balance between, signing a contract, which we can appreciate folks may not want to do prior to funding being received, but also not just writing someone in who, has not been consulted at all on the proposal. So trying to find kind of a middle ground where folks are on board should funding be received can be very helpful when putting together your proposal.
Thank you both. The questions are really rolling in, so I'll try to pose a few follow-ups about partnerships, and I'll try to organize my questions somewhat around themes so we can move from one to the next. Someone in the webinar asked, do you need to bring a partner in your proposal? Do you have to propose partnerships? And also, how many partners should you be proposing? If you're an organization based in the Middle East and North Africa, how many US partners, or vice versa? If you're based in the United States, how many Middle East and North Africa, or US partnerships for that matter, should you bring in? What kind of guidance or parameters do we have about whether people need partners and how many, if so?
I'll start again, and Andy, please feel free to share your thoughts if I'm missing anything. But we have in the past only seen partnership. Every grantee that we have supported has had partners in the past. And I think it's quite rare that we see an organization being able to conduct their program fully without any partnership, both international and in the US. Unless this organization is a big organization that has a network in countries that you are proposing to work in. there is rarely any reason for not bringing partners into your mix. We do not have any recommendations around the number of partners to bring on. I think this really does depend on the program design and what you envision that program to look like. If your program is going to be a small program, that would make sense that you would have 1 or 2 partners maximum. But if your program is large, there might be a number of institutions that will be involved in the program. Am I missing Andy?
The only other thing I would add is maybe just thinking about this too from an equity lens, having partners in the program who can speak for different communities that you are intending to serve or different populations that you are intending to serve, different cultures, thinking about it from that perspective too is I would say, pretty strong argument for bringing in diverse partners into your program so that you have different voices that are bought into the program that you are seeking to build.
There were a few follow-up questions around what the Stevens Initiative can do or what we recommend people to do during this period of designing a proposal, working on a project idea. Is there anything that we can do to help people find each other? What do we recommend that people do? We had a few follow-up questions. I think you spoke to this, but it would be great to reiterate it.
I can jump in, and maybe if other colleagues have other thoughts. We have intentionally left a pretty long window open for the application process in order to allow applicants time to design their program, identify some potential partners, work with those partners, ensure that they're bought in, and put together their best possible proposal. In terms of support for applicants, maybe aside from what I mentioned, one idea that comes to mind is I think we saw this during our last competition in 2020. We saw a lot of folks coalescing on social media around finding different partners for their virtual exchanges. There are, networks that I think you can look into depending on what kind of an organization you sit at. If you sit at an institution of higher education, for example, looking into your study abroad office or your Office of Global Affairs can be a good way to identify partners. If you work on a program at a nonprofit organization, speaking with others at your organization about their, international or domestic, depending on what you're looking for, networks can be really helpful as well when it comes to identifying partners. Do other colleagues of mine have thoughts about this? Maybe that can be a start. And yeah, if folks have additional questions about that, happy to try to address as well.
One of our attendees asked, can you clarify whether those who have received non-Stevens Initiative grants from the U.S. Department of State for other programs are still eligible to apply for seeding grants or scaling grants for that matter? And a related question, how would you advise people to think about whether they should apply for a seeding grant versus a scaling grant? So first, if you've received government funds before, not Stevens Initiative, can you still apply for a seeding grant? And more generally, how would you consider the question of whether to apply for a seeding or scaling?
I'm gonna jump here. Andy and Miriam can add into the seeding or scaling, but yes, if you have other programs that funded by the Department of State, you can apply for the competition for Stevens Initiative.
And I can maybe comment on the scaling or seeding grants. I believe, again, this is, as we defined it, scaling grants are those that have an established high quality virtual exchange already in place, and they would like to expand that to new regions or new participants, new topics that are being brought in. Similarly, seeding grants are those that are just starting out or just starting virtual exchange in general. And so I think it depends. This is something that will be more a subjective conversation and an internal conversation, whether they qualify for a scaling or a seeding grant.
Maybe just very briefly to add, scaling grants are intended to reach a very large number of youth participants. Seeding grants are intended to reach a smaller, more modest number of participants. It also probably depends a bit on your organizational size and what kind of budgetary capacity you have. So there's a lot of different variables that might go into consideration when you're thinking about which award to apply for.
If I can mention just one thing, Henry, to answer this question, the call for proposals on SurveyMonkey Apply has very specific parameters for each of these tracks. And so I would encourage applicants to look at those parameters, both in terms of the anticipated grant size range and in terms of the cost per participant. Doing a little bit of math, you can figure out exactly how big of a participant pool you might need for each of the grant types and grant sizes. And so I think that is also helpful and necessary since those are parameters we spelled out.
We had a question about whether there's a specific number of young people that need to be reached for a Stevens Initiative program. And as Kyle says, you can determine the range of eligible numbers of participants by looking at the grant sizes we offer and looking at the cost per participant ranges that we specify. So that answers that question as well. We had a few questions about what our expectations or hopes are regarding the amount of communication or time young people spend in the program. What guidance do we have about, we call it sometimes contact hours or dosage for the synchronous and asynchronous communication? What are our expectations? Do we have rules? Do we have guidance? What are we hoping to see?
Maybe I can start again. I think the one thing that we have consistently seen across the programs that we have funded is no matter how many dosage contact hours you put into the program, the young people always want more time with each other and more time to interact with each other. So that should be kind of in the back of your mind as you're putting together these contact hours or designing your specific program. I don't believe we have necessarily a specific dosage guideline around how many contact hours, as long as there is some form of synchronous and asynchronous time that is spent collaborating on the project or the topic that they are working together on. So there isn't necessarily a guidance on that front, except to say that they will always want to have more time to interact and get to know each other.
Miriam, I think that's well said. I'll also just point out once again in the call for proposals under the virtual exchange design considerations that Andy mentioned during the presentation, there is a specific bullet for duration and contact hours where we list out what are maybe some common practices in the virtual exchange field. I also think this bullet does a really good job kind of talking about the pros and cons of each. Specifically to read from it just very, very quickly, less contact or a shorter program might not give participants the chance to establish relationships, which is what Miriam was just talking about, but then longer programs might be difficult to schedule around academic or seasonal calendars. So there are advantages and disadvantages to both. So I think that's something that as you design a program, you should be thinking about.
We've got a couple questions about program design and balance. So one of the questions was, is there a specific ratio of Middle East and North African participants to US participants that applicants should keep in mind when designing a program? And then a related question was, does this have to be a two-way exchange, meaning that our institution sends students and receives students, or can it be a one-way exchange where we only receive students? So I think that question might be coming at this a little bit more from an in-person exchange perspective. How do we think about this question of mutual benefit, reciprocity, and who the exchange is really designed for, and who it should be reaching?
I can start, and please feel free, everybody else, to jump in as well. But we don't specifically have a rigid one-on-one guidance in terms of one MENA student per one US student. This is, again, a program design that depends on how you envision your program to come together. Again, we do want some form of a balance to make sure that the US students are receiving just as much exposure and benefiting from the program and learning from the MENA students, and vice versa. The same thing is going on for the MENA students as well. So there has to be some form of a balance, if not one-on-one student participant numbers. In terms of the benefits, again, I think the second part of the question was about Can you repeat that question? Sorry, Henry.
Does the program need to be beneficial to people from both places? Who are the people that we're trying to serve in this program? And I think borrowing from the language of in-person study abroad, in an in-person program, people from one place travel to another. How do we think about, does this in any way relate to how a virtual exchange works?
We would like this similar to what I said in terms of the number of students and the balance of students in the program. We want this program to be beneficial for both the US students and the MENA students. So regardless of the number of students who are involved in the program, they have to have somewhat equal, we would like to see an equal benefit for both the MENA students and the US students. Unlike maybe in-person exchange programs where a student is coming from another country to the United States, and there is a benefit for both the host country, the host community, as well as that student. That is something that we still want to see in a virtual exchange. Again, as equal as possible. And I would like my colleagues to jump in.
I think a good example of how things can be mutually beneficial, but maybe different, could be in the goal of engaging in the program for a participant. Maybe a young person from MENA, this is an oversimplification, but a young person from MENA might be joining a program to improve their English skills, and that's one of the goals of the program. And the young person in the United States might be joining not to improve their English skills, maybe they're already a native English speaker, but maybe to learn more about the community on the other side of the exchange. And that's a goal of the program. And so although both of those goals are different for those different participants, they are both that will have an impact on that participant through their virtual exchange. And so that's how it is mutually beneficial, but maybe those benefits look different. The sending part of this question gives me a little pause, Henry. I think you said, that was maybe framed from an in-person exchange kind of framework. Encourage people to remember that we are talking about virtual exchanges here, and if any in-person component is planned, we spell out, again, in the call for proposals on SurveyMonkey Apply, some pretty specific directions and instructions about in-person components under the grant competition and rules. And so I would encourage people to look there too.
Thank you very much. We have a couple questions around what to do if you are an organization that hasn't been operating very long, has a small annual budget, or other questions related to what we call the 80% rule, which we describe in detail in the call for proposals. What do we recommend, or what are our rules regarding organizations that have a very small budget? What do we need those organizations to keep in mind regarding their eligibility and suitability for a Stevens Initiative grant?
Omar, do you want me to, I can maybe start, and then if there's anything else that you'd like to add. Sure. So, Henry, you alluded to the 80% rule, which is that organizations can request no more in funding than 80% of their, I like don't even know what year it is anymore, of their fiscal year 2021, so their last year's budget. This is so that Stevens Initiative funding ultimately does not flood an organization's budget and comprise, an overwhelming majority of the organization's funding. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you are applying. Another thing to keep in mind is applicants are required to complete either a domestic, if you are a US-based organization, or a foreign, if you are a non-US based organization, subrecipient questionnaire, which is intended to outline all of your organization's controls and procedures, which is something that we will evaluate when we are determining eligibility for funding. So reporting on that is also important. And then there are also eligibility requirements, like you have to be an established nonprofit organization. You cannot be a for-profit organization and apply for Stevens Initiative funding. If you are an organization and you have determined, we are too small to apply for Stevens Initiative funding, or we are not eligible to apply for Stevens Initiative funding, there are still avenues to get involved. You can partner up with another organization. There's also an avenue if you require a fiscal sponsorship and an organization to help support with some of the management and administration of the award. That is also an eligible avenue for funding. Like I mentioned before too, partnering with other larger organizations or other eligible organizations can be an avenue to getting involved with grant funding as well. We also have lots of other avenues on our website to get engaged with programs that the Stevens Initiative is already funding or will fund in the future, other opportunities. So check out our website as well. Do my colleagues have anything else to add to that?
No, I think I agree with everything that Andy said. Yes, there are other avenues. If you feel like too small, you can benefit from physical sponsor if you can provide that, or be a partner within a program. And there are some also requirement in the questionnaires that we look at a certain values, and we do certain kind of assessment. And so you might think also that you might not be eligible, but it can't, like, there's other venues and ways of going around that. So I encourage also to go and read in details in the site. Thank you.
I think this might be our last question due to time. I know that we are very committed to making sure that all applicants' questions are addressed. And so perhaps Andy or a colleague can speak to what we'll be doing in the time ahead to make sure people feel that their questions, whether posed here or by email, are being thoroughly addressed. And we really are committed to making sure that the many unanswered questions that we've gotten are addressed as we are able. The last question I want to pose is about in-person elements. Some folks asked about site visits or in-person travel. Some folks asked about what kinds of advisories we require or ask grantees to keep in mind. So are any kinds of in-person face-to-face encounters allowed? In-person travel for participants, for staff? Like what's on the table here, particularly in the context of the pandemic, understanding that these are all a little bit unclear these days.
I can start here, and guys, you can add. Yes, in-person or staff traveling or participant support cost travel, that can be included in the budget. And yes, since our main funder for this competition is the Department of State, so the Department of State travel rates and travel regulations apply here, and please consider them as a resource for any of these decisions or planning.
Maybe I'll just also add, in terms of the in-person component, I think one thing to keep in mind is that in-person travel is allowed as long as it is complementary to the virtual exchange component of the program. And this includes both in-person travel for staff, participants, and administrators of the grant. I think as Omar mentioned, to of course look through the guidelines provided by the federal government in terms of the budgetary aspects of this. But I think the other thing that we want to keep in mind is we are still in the ongoing pandemic phase, and maybe have alternative plans for whether if that in-person travel may not happen because of reasons beyond your control. The other thing is there are very specific in-person travel guidelines as well that come through the State Department, and it requires a lot of time and planning ahead, because we will need to be working with embassies abroad to make sure that visas are acquired by the participants or staff. So this just takes a lot of time in planning.
Thank you to my colleagues for helping to field all of these questions. Like Henry mentioned, there are a lot that we didn't get to. We will take a look through our question log. All of your questions have been recorded. We will make sure that we update our FAQ document on our website with any questions that are not already answered in the FAQ and that we haven't been able to answer today. So please check back in a couple of weeks, a week or two, and we'll make sure that we update those questions. We're just going to go off of video really quickly and pull up one last slide to close us out. Just some last minute reminders. The deadline to apply to the competition is September 29th, 2022 at 5:00 p.m. US Eastern Time. The application website is listed on your screen. It's also listed on the Stevens Initiative's website. It is on the platform SurveyMonkey Apply. We are also hosting our July 12th webinar on budget and compliance for your proposal. You can register on our website. And we will be also answering any additional kind of last minute questions live on August 10th at a webinar that you can also register for on our website. Like I say, if all else fails, please do feel free to email us at stevensinitiative@aspeninstitute.org. You can check out our website. We are here for you. So I just want to thank you all so much for your time and for your really great questions. Please feel free to reach out if there's anything that we can do to help answer questions or to support. So thank you, everyone. I'm wishing you all a really great rest of your day and rest of your week. Thank you.